Welcome to the United We Scan podcast, the podcast by rural carriers for rural carriers. The views expressed in this podcast are of the presenters and the presenters only and do not represent the views, opinions, or strategies of the United States Postal Service or the National Rural Letter Carriers Association. We ask that you please consult your assigned union representative for guidance in your local area. Please like this podcast, share with your fellow rural carriers, and subscribe to be notified each time a new episode is uploaded. Please leave a comment or question for us below. Thank you. Now, here are the hosts of the United We Scan podcast.
But, in my situation, we had, a DR removed. We had another DR come in from another district. They moved her over. And she turned around and started labor charges against our district manager. Well, they decided to reschedule or, reallocate her back to her original DR territory and brought a new one in. And you know what happened to those labor charges? Not a fucking thing.
And that's what we have to look at. We have to look at all the things that need to happen. And this is the most interesting part about this. Back in 2024 at Mid-States, I had a decent conversation with President Maston. And at one point he said, "Why are you so negative about things?" I said, "I'm only negative about negative things going on with this craft. What I'm positive about is that this next contract, we get a $10 an hour increase. We get better cost of living adjustments, a little bigger increase into the EMA, and we get stronger language to protect carriers from toxic management." His response: "That's not going to happen." Well, it needs to happen. Our craft needs somebody to step up, needs somebody to show that they actually have the craft's best interest at heart. I don't care what you've done in the past for now. We can deal with that at the election table. But right now, this very moment, we need somebody who's willing to step up to the table and hit us a home run. Because we're looking down the barrel of a gun. And that gun is loss of carriers. To the point where the rural craft is not sustainable. You're going to have so many people quitting and not enough people coming in that you're not going to be able to cover the routes. So, Maston, step up. Get us a decent contract that the carriers can vote for, and don't give us the fear mongering of, "Oh, well, we won't get better in arbitration." Either give us a good deal or we'll vote it down just like the city carriers and take our chances in arbitration. Because guess what? I could go into that arbitration room and I guarantee you the arguments I would put forth in front of that arbitrator would get us a better increase than what the city carriers did. Because there is enough information out there on the web, through news articles, through documents the post office posts, that we can get the right increases, that we can get benefits that help the craft, and that we can get the protection that we need. You have a ton of documents in your files of grievances that carriers have filed against management for the hostile and toxic work environment that we have. And you could include that in that arbitration to make the language stronger in our grievance policy. You can get us great cost of living adjustments. You can get us a great wage increase if you had the balls to do it.
I'm not going to stand here and let you question the manliness of our supreme leader.
Then you do it, Bill. I know I'm not the only one.
You mean question his manliness?
Question his ability to negotiate.
Oh no, there is none. There is none whatsoever. You know, when somebody made a comment about him being a force at the contract table, I looked at him and I said, "How do you say that with a straight face?" I said, "Because I nearly shit myself when you said it." you know, you no, you don't understand. I know I don't understand. But I also know who not lobby, languished in the shadow of everybody else until he just got pushed up to the next chair, to the next chair, to the next chair. So please, I still have stories of his representation of people out in California ringing in my ears. So no, don't ever expect me to believe any type of bullshit in regards to his abilities and skills. You'll see when the tentative agreement comes out for us, you will see. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, and I'm pushing as much as I'm running against Don Maston here. I am pushing for him to actually fight for a good contract for us because we desperately need it.
And
We
it's admirable,
desperately need it.
James. It's admirable that you're pushing for him to get a good contract. But if 99% was done as of the last, national convention we were at, and I heard that directly from a national board member. This is not hearsay. If you're looking at 99% done, and you suspect, probably rightfully so, that all they were waiting for was to get the percentages that the city carriers would get, then you're pushing a snowflake up the hill in the face of an avalanche because it's already done. It's it's already precast, and all you got to do is put your fingers in the wet cement right now and write your initials because that's how close the contract is to being done. And there's no way, no way to push him anymore because of the fact those are the only items left for consideration and deliberation between the post office and our union.
Mm-hmm.
I commend you for saying this, that you'd want them to push, but like I said, you're pushing a snowflake uphill against an avalanche.
I have to because I want what's best for the rural craft. And what's best for the rural craft is for the current president and the rest of the national board to do what is necessary to get us a deserved contract that benefits the craft. They've done enough to screw over the craft in the last couple of years. Now it's time for them to fix some of that with a good contract. Rex screwed over the carriers when they allowed management to implement it without doing counts before that. They screwed over the craft with the MOU, making them pay back management for the first time I've ever heard of. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to me is my fellow brother and sister rural carriers get a fair contract for fair work. We get very emotional about this. I am personally livid over what happened to the city carriers because those are our brothers and sisters of the craft too. They're out there doing the same job we are, delivering the mail every single day, no matter what's going on in the country, no matter what's going on in management, no matter what's going on at the top of the union. They're still out there doing their job. And we're at a precipice. these crafts. And I'm going to just throw this out there. But if our NRLCA board gets us a contract that is triple what the NALC got, I got dimes to donuts that says that the city carriers will want to join the NRLCA. They'll want to merge the NALC into the NRLCA because they will want what we have. They will want the evaluation and the ability to not have to work other routes with forced overtime. On top of that, with that tripling of what the city carriers got, that would put us right in line with inflation. That would put us in a position to have enough subs coming on because they will see this as a fruitful job again. One where they can actually live off the RCA income if they wanted to, if they worked hard enough. One where rural carriers can afford to pay their bills, and some can stop sleeping in their cars and using Planet Fitness for showers.
Yeah, that would almost be funny if it wasn't true.
Unfortunately.
And
Yeah,
you know,
RCA's on food stamps. Yeah, regular carriers on food stamps or WIC because they can't afford to feed their family on the wages that they're earning. You know, the house prices in just my area alone, houses doubled in value. Rental places doubled in rent. Some tripled. Yet our wages didn't match that. Our contract doesn't match that. Why?
we're like
Because
the lady
we
on table 2, James, the one that qualified for a low income housing grant, a career
mm-hmm.
carrier on table 2.
Yeah. You know, and that's exactly the problem. The rural craft, the city craft, all the postal jobs in the 1970s when the Wildcat strike happened, they were fighting the exact same thing we have now. They were fighting low wages, terrible working conditions, no benefits, and they fought for it. And it's time for our craft to fight. No, I'm not calling for a strike. I'm not calling for a wildcat. I'm not calling for that because that is illegal. And I must insist it is illegal and will result in termination and blacklist from federal employment per the law. But I'm just comparing the same situations that happened back then to today. We have carriers that believe their unions are not working for them. They have carriers out there who don't trust their stewards to have their best interest because the steward comes in their office, goes into management's office, and is jawing and laughing with management. That's somebody that just messaged me yesterday, told me that their steward went in there, was jawing and laughing with management, came out and said, your grievance was settled for language. When it was a escalated remedy case because it was a failure to comply.
But can you imagine the language they would have heard from me if they came out and told me that? Mm.
This is the battle that we're in now. And it's time for our rural carriers to suit up. It's time for us to get in this union. It's time for us to fight for this union. It's time for us to fight for our brothers and sisters. There are a lot of brothers and sisters that will not step up to fight. And a lot of people will pull their dues. But I'm telling you that's a mistake. Because the one thing we have that unites us all is the ability to use our voice and fight with our vote. And our vote matters, especially when it comes to who is leading us. when we vote for delegates for national convention, we vote for people who we want to walk up into national convention and vote for our president, vice president, secretary treasurer, director of labor relations, director of steward operations, and our 4-year executive committeeman. That also allows us to pass resolutions that would go into the next contract we have. And I know Don Maston said that he takes 20 to 30 resolutions, closer to 20, when he goes into contract negotiations. And that's wrong too. Especially when you pass 200, 300 resolutions a national convention. Think about those numbers.
You know what's disturbing about that, James, is that Don specifically stood there on stage and told us as soon as one contract is signed and voted on, that they start working on the next contract. Well, where are all those constitutional amendments that we've put in, all those resolutions that we've submitted? Why aren't those being injected into the talk for the next contract? That way you wouldn't have to spend, so little time on 20 or 30 of them. You'd have the time to start doing them right away and get 100, 150 of them in there.
Mm-hmm. And that's your negotiating. That's your negotiating chips.
Yes,
your resolutions are your negotiating chips that you use to try and get the best contract possible for your carriers. And I call them your carriers because when you are the leader, you are responsible for your craft. You're responsible for getting them the best deal possible, no matter what management says. So let's take some random resolution from last year, and we'll go with the resolution mine that was passed. The 2080 hours or 2 years to make an RCA a career RCA. There were 4 other resolutions that were similar to mine. And there were better ones and there were worse ones. So you take all of those. You don't show management all of those, but you take the best one to management. Management doesn't like it? Okay, we'll renegotiate. What do you say for that position on the contract? And they bring back something that's garbage. So you turn around, you bring your second best one to them. It's called negotiating. It's something that you do in these contract negotiations. You don't just roll over and give them 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5 in a settlement with an arbitrator because they rejected the TA that you argued for by yourself. But you got to argue for the best of the craft. And I just feel like nobody's arguing for the best of their craft at this point because they've spent too much time away from working with the craft. They don't come out to these offices and see what's actually going down at street level. They don't talk to regular Joe carriers. They need to come out here. They need to come see what's going on. They need to talk with carriers at these offices because these carriers that are working 6 days a week, 12, 14, 16, 19 hours a day. And yes, I've talked to a carrier who works 19 hours a day because there's no relief and he's the regular carrier running the route. Those are the carriers our national board should be talking to. Not the people who actually can afford to take the time off to go to these regional conferences. Because those are the carriers that are hurt the most by these contract negotiations. Yes, every carrier is hurt by these contract negotiations if they're terrible. But the carriers who have to cover for the people who have been fired or quit because of the BS that you've pulled up at national, those are the carriers that have the most pain going on. And injury to one carrier is an injury to all carriers. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I'm saving. I'm saving the comment for the closing remarks. I'll throw it in here now. Okay, what the hell? Um, no, in regards to the delegates, and this is the most important factor of it because of the fact that we all know how many of the retirees go to these damn conventions for a free vacation. Anybody says any different, except for the majority of them, there's very few retirees that have active participation in the best interest of our craft. But most of them, like I said, they get a paid vacation. I just sit there and laugh because this falls on to our listeners, and our listeners, you have to, let your carriers in your office also know that you stop voting for these people that do not represent your interests, who don't have your best interests at heart for themselves because of the fact that, oh, they're an ADR, they're in the NSS, or they're your president or your vice president or secretary treasurer. You know, like I said, in so many cases, Pennsylvania is so reflective of what the national board is that it just has made me sick. And for years, people say, "Oh, Bill, get on this state board. Get on the state board." You know, no, for the same reason I took a early retirement, for myself, in regards to my physical and mental well being because of the fact I was ready to commit violence because of the atmosphere in my office. Okay, in the same way, Pennsylvania is, like I said, it's a mirror image of the national, delegates and the national boards in regards to the politics. We currently have a situation that is just, it makes me sick. I won't discuss it in open public, but the fact of the matter is, it makes me sick. These people are more interested in the gossip, the bullshit, the pettiness, the politics. And you know what the number one thing of all these people is? They don't want to run their routes. What the hell? Are you here to serve the craft, or are you here to serve your own interests? Explain that to me. So everybody that listens, and everybody who listens to this podcast through the week, please inform your other carriers, that are union members, who can vote for the delegates, to submit names of people who represent your interests, not the people who are out there collecting a full-time paycheck off of the national board, whether it be, the NSS or not. People aligned to your views, your interests, and really express a desire to serve the craft. Because most of these people that I know, okay, and I can go into very great detail about it. I won't. They don't want to deliver their routes, and that's not serving the best interests of the crafts. That's serving their own interests first. When you have a 20+ year DR who turned around and was released from his obligations, went back to his route for one day, and then turned around, took 4 days of LWOP, and then retired because he was physically unable to perform the duties of a rural craft. So what does that tell you? The only reason he was in that position was not to do his route? I just, like I said, look for people willing to serve you. James knows my situation. I don't need the money, running for president or vice president or anything. But the fact of the matter is, here I am, retired, officially retired. I may come back as an ARC, but the thing of it is that, I'm still putting in the effort. I'm still taking phone calls. I'm still, advising people in my office and other offices. But the thing of it is that, folks, if you don't get the right people going to the national convention, you won't have the delegates voting for the change that we need. And we need a change desperately. I've been saying it for 4 years, and it's no more evident than it was back then as it is now. We need change. And when this contract comes out, just like Renfro. God help you if you show your face anywhere, Don Matson, because nobody can guarantee for the way we're being treated, what we're being paid, compensation package that you're all talking about. No, it's unacceptable. 1.3% for an RCA is going to represent a little over 28 cents an hour. 28 cents an hour. Come on, folks. Now you're going to be making what, $20.56, 66 cents instead of 20.38. Come on now. Is that a living wage? No.
Nope.
So,
And that's the
either
thing.
shit or get off the pot, because we've got to do this.
And that's the thing.
If you have,
I'm putting a call out there. We have on our Discord server the breakdown of states for national delegate. On my page, James Brendan for NRLCA president, there is a post where I break down all the states for delegates. If you are a delegate that wants to make a difference for this craft, get on there, put your name in there, get people to recognize you from your state. Because we need delegates that want this craft to be better, want this craft to be stronger, want this craft to have leaders instead of board members. We need you. We need people to join this union, pay dues to this union, to vote to make the difference. And I know there are a lot of people that are going to be like, oh, I don't want to give my money to the current board. You're not giving your money to the current board. You're turning around and going to make a difference for the craft by doing that. That is what we need at this point. We need more people in this union to outweigh the votes of the current regime. And we need people to vote. When we're talking 10, 15% of the voting membership making all the choices for the craft, we're not lying. That is how many people vote for their delegations, 10 to 15%. When people voted for the new contract, what was it, 18% voted for it?
shade under 20%. Yeah.
We need to make a change. We need to double, triple the number of people involved in that to make a difference. To make change, you need to be involved. You need to understand what's going on, and you need to be part of the union. And I know a lot of people find that off-putting, but membership with this union is the only way we're going to make change in this union. And I know a lot of people are disheartened. A lot of people are disenfranchised. A lot of people are angry at the union. And you have every right to be for your situation. But think about your brothers and sisters in this craft. Think about what they're going through too. The same stuff you're going through. And without that right to vote, you can't change it. All you can do is complain on social media. You can put bad comments on posts and then send messages to people begging for help. And I don't care if you put people down on Facebook for things and then turn around and beg for help, because I'm going to help you either way. Because every member of this craft deserves help. Every member of this craft deserves a place to vent, and every member of this craft deserves to have somebody listen to them. Change is on the horizon. It can't get here soon enough. But the good news is ours comes up in August. August National Convention, we can vote in new leaders. City carriers have to wait until 2026. We can do this now.
You know what I think that people fail to realize, James, is that whether you're in the union or not, what happens at the national convention affects all of you. If you're paying dues or not, every decision they make affects every one of you. The only way you can affect change is if you're part of the union, if you're part of the effort to make that change, to have a voice. It's the same way with people who vote or choose not to vote or don't even register to vote. If you don't exercise that right, then in my opinion, you have no right to bitch about your elected officials, whether they be political or union, because you've chosen to sit on the sidelines and let everybody else, deal with the grief, deal with the situations, pay their dues. I'm one of those adamant people that, if you don't vote, I really don't want to be associated with you in regards to the general political elections, because of the millions of people who have sacrificed their lives since the days of the Revolutionary War for our freedoms, for our rights, that you do not participate in. And it's a shame. It's to me, it's the most sincerest form of blasphemy, where people in Iraq, when they were first voting, they had to get their thumbs dipped into a purple dye to show that they voted. And here are these, ISIS and Islamic radicals out there chopping their thumbs off. But they were willing to put their lives at risk to vote for a government. And it was like the first time in years that they could vote without having, absolute corruption dictate the results. That's just me. I mean, I'm a little overboard in regards to the, your rights and responsibilities, and you have the right not to vote. But just like the people who go on to the rural carriers, Facebook pages, RCAs, and every other page, and put anonymous member and then, make comments. I saw one yesterday where an anonymous member said, "I'm not going to bother, posting any more questions here because of the way I'm getting treated." Why are you treating these people that way? Sure, there are people who are sitting there asking questions that the majority of us know the answers to. But then you have the select few to turn around and pick on them for not knowing the answers. They don't know that person's situation. They don't know if they're an RCA. They don't know if they're a new regular and don't understand the benefits, or they don't understand the seniority charts or the workday relief lift. Instead of being so negative, instead of being so petty, help them. Don't drive them into the ground. Don't drive them to the point where they say, "Well, I'm not even going to bother asking anymore because, get his brief." Be of service. It doesn't cost you anything to be nice.
I'm going to piggyback on that. There is no such thing as a stupid question, but there
Yes, there
are
is.
stupid answers. No, there's
The
not.
stupid
If it's a
questions, the ones
true,
never asked.
all right, you got me with that one. But as long as the person's intention of asking the question is honest and truthful, that they want to know the answer to, then there is no stupid question. Now, I'm guilty of asking questions that I already know the answer to, because that's how my brain works to get people to learn. I ask them questions that help them to understand what's going on, or I'm asking questions to get the truth out of somebody. Don, won't name names. Most of the time, when I'm talking with somebody that I want to get the truth out of, I'm going to ask them questions that I already know the answer to see how they roll. Because guess what? Management would rather climb a tree to lie than stand on the ground to tell the truth. And if anybody is lying to me, they might as well be management. And they know who they are that have lied to me. And we can argue all day long, back and forth, about what means this, what means that, so on and so forth, versus ambiguous language versus black and white. Mistakes can be made. We're only human. But when your only claim to the problem is a single word, you're doing it out of malice instead of out of help. We need to be together now more than ever. Whether you like what I do or don't, whether you like what Don Maston does or doesn't, right now, this craft on the streets, the carriers working their routes every single day, need to be united for a great contract that we need so desperately. And if we don't get it, we need to hold those who gave it to us accountable. Just like I ask people to hold me accountable, we need to hold our national board accountable. We need to hold our delegates accountable for this. Just like I said, the executive council of the NALC needs to be held accountable for this modified contract that they negotiated at the arbitrator table. But we need to do something. We need to stand for something, because if you stand for nothing, if you don't stand at all, you stand for nothing. And as somebody just said, accountability starts with yourself. Ask yourself, is what I'm doing benefiting the craft? Is me not filing a grievance against management doing this benefiting the craft? Is me working off the clock before my shift starts so I can get home earlier benefiting the craft? These are the questions you need to ask yourself right off the bat. Everything you do when it comes to dealing with management, when it comes to voting for this union, when it comes to speaking about this union, is what you're doing benefiting the craft as a whole? Because you are just one of over 100,000 craft members. But when those 100 plus thousand craft members get together with one voice, they have the power to make a difference. You have the chance to benefit this craft by stepping up and doing something about it. If you are a non-dues payer, becoming a dues payer is a chance to make a difference. If you are a dues payer, voting is a chance to make a difference. Becoming a delegate nominee is a chance to make a difference. Becoming a delegate is a chance to make a difference. And voting at national convention is a chance to make a difference. We don't have the option to remain silent anymore. We don't have the option to sit back and watch what happens. Now is the time to stand up. Now is the time to voice, grieve, fight for your wage, your rights, your benefits. Because if you sit in silence, you stand for nothing. Phil, give us your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I don't know. Listening to me comment on Mr. Johnson's comment about no overhead if you live with mom and dad. Not everybody has that opportunity there, but if you want to be that type of asshole, I commend your remarks. the, the the gist of this contract that the city carriers are now being forced to accept is that there's no way in hell that I see any room for improvement from our end, because of the lack of leadership for the last 4 or 5 years that we've had from our national board. Okay, and it's a shame to say that, but I'm just being realistic. The people that have moved up the ladder, just switching chairs, are all the same mold, and nobody has really gotten us anything decent. I think the last decent contract was, maybe the one Jeanette got, the first one she had for us. But like I said, you're looking at approximately 26 28 cents increase at 1.3. I it breaks my heart. It does. So, God bless you all. I can pray all I want for, a better contract, but, like I said, being realistic, I'm not going to expect much. And I feel for all of you. I mean, you're out there putting your lives on the line every time you go out on your routes. And, some more than others in regards to the conditions that they're driving in. You're dealing with hostile work environment, you toxic management. You've got people in your office that they couldn't give two rats ass. They just want to get their route done and go home. And it's in our craft and in city craft, so you have individuals like that. But the fact of the matter is that everything that happens to one of us happens to all of us. And we have to guard against that complacency of saying, well, it doesn't really bother me. Everything affects us. If somebody is working off the clock, time standards will get changed again, and then it'll affect you. And then you might have a problem with that person who's working off the clock. Okay, somebody who's doing favors for management because they're friends, and a sub's not getting the hours, or somebody who volunteers to help isn't getting paid. That will affect you because the post office that you're in, their operational costs will drop, and they'll be sitting there going, "Well, we don't need any more carriers, or we don't need any more subs." My situation, our office is going to be out of subs in 45 days. The other lady said 17 routes in her office, no subs. 57 route office, 4 subs. How the hell are you going to survive working 6 days a week for 6 months at a time and then have your paycheck changed again? It's a vicious cycle, and we have to get out of it. And we have to do that by changing our representatives. You change your state representatives, get rid of the old fogies that are up there that was sitting there and don't want to, carry their routes. Get rid of, the people in the NSS that aren't doing anything. And we've had several of them in my area that have been removed, 2 ADRs and a DR. So, it is possible for these things to happen. I fear for the fact that somewhere down the line that Don is going to still run for president, irregardless of having the contract signed or not, in hopes of being able to hand off the presidency to somebody else instead of James. That will be a critical mistake because the only other person that's qualified to actually occupy that position has only been in their new position for a year, and they need to do a lot more work, and that individual is qualified to do that work. But I won't mention John Adams by name. He needs to stay in that position because he's getting some stuff done. Leadership does not have to do anything more than lead by example. They don't have to know everything. They don't have to be everything. That's why you have subordinates. but they have to be a leader. And we haven't had one in years. And we're due for some real leadership. Not going to be myself this year. It may be James. But no matter who it steps up, we need real leadership. And that depends on you getting the right people selected as delegates, sent to national, and electing the person best qualified to represent the craft. Not best qualified because they've worked their way up the board for 20 years. Not best qualified because they haven't carried a route in 20 years. The best qualified to represent the craft. And the best person to represent the craft is somebody in the craft. And don't ever, ever come to me and say, oh, well, I've been a rural craft member for 30 years. Yes, but for 25 of them, you haven't carried a route. Or for 18 of them, you haven't carried a route. You don't know jack shit about what our craft goes through. So therefore, you're not qualified to speak on behalf of the craft. Now, here we are again. We're doing this podcast. We're doing it for free. We're doing it on our time, and we appreciate everybody listening. The fact of the matter is, we are the only ones that can change the direction of this union. And I hope you take that to heart. I hope you take it back to your offices and talk it up, and you get people involved to the point where we get more qualified delegates going to the national convention who have our interests at heart, not their interests of being off their routes, their interests doing special committees to Washington D.C., but have our interests at heart. As always, everybody go out there and do your jobs. Do it professionally, do it efficiently, do it safely, and make sure you get home to your loved ones because you are the most important delivery of the day. James, last words?
You're right. We are the craft. The two of us here are the craft still. Bill is still actively working with the craft. And we do this on our own time, on our own dime. Why? Because we believe the craft is the most important part of the NRLCA. The craft is the only thing our national board should be concerned about. They shouldn't be concerned about the financial position of the Postal Service. The Postal Service has been in dire straits for decades. The Postal Service has only shown a profit in a few years. We need to be worried about the financial position of the rural carriers. And we need the president, the vice president, and everybody else on that board to think about the rural carrier in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, Nebraska, Wyoming, everywhere, not just the ones in suburban places like Detroit, Lansing, New York,
Westchester.
places, Westchester, places like that. We are all rural carriers. You need to think of them all. You need to think about the carrier that's on the 1.5 mile route, as well as the carrier on the 150-mile route. The one that does all paved roads with mounted versus the carrier on all dirt roads and mounted, or the carrier on paved roads with CBUs. Every single rural carrier matters. Every single rural carrier deserves a national board that stands up for them, fights for them, and does everything in the best interest of the rural carrier. Because the rural carrier dues pay their salary. The rural carrier dues pay for the conferences. The rural carrier dues pay for every single member of the national steward system except the local office steward. And that is the people they should be answering to, not capitulating to management's whims and management's threats, like telling them if carriers don't pay back the post office, they're going to cut their routes a second time, when they could barely manage to cut the routes in the first time. The carriers matter. Their lives matter. And a contract coming out like the city carriers, that's a death sentence to some carriers. That's a death sentence to rural offices that can't get help because you can't pay them enough to deliver the mail with the management that's in that office. The carriers are talking, and we know you're listening. We know you're listening to this podcast because you've talked about stuff we've said on this podcast. So we know you're paying attention. But the question is are you going to take what we say and actually put it to use? To the carriers out there, I'm listening. My social media comments are open. My messages are open. I'm here for you at James Brennan for NRLCA President on Facebook. If you need somebody to talk to, if you need help, if you need something, reach out. And if you want to help, reach out. Let me know what you want to help me with. I'm available. I have it open 24/7. The only time I don't answer is when I'm actively delivering or when I'm sleeping. I do not let carriers slip through the cracks. I'm here for you. I'm here for the craft. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We'll be back next Sunday for everybody, hopefully, with no recording issues. And we'll see you then. Bye-bye.